Thank you, David.
All right. Oh, and Peter Hahn is here. Great. So I think we've got everybody. Mary was going to be a little bit late, she said. So I think otherwise we have all of our primary members. So welcome everyone, and welcome to all of our attendees as well. I think are joining, they're all being let in. It takes a little bit of time to populate there. This is our sixth full working group meeting for the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Working Group. And Happy New Year to you all. So our agenda for today, we have, in addition to our initial group work of agenda, ground rules, and meeting summaries, we have three big topics for discussion. The first is to talk about the synthesis of public input from the December 12th public workshop. Then we want to talk about data gathering and analysis and a plan for how that's going to go forward. And then lastly, talk about the schedule and work plan going forward in the context of the potential fall town meeting date. And then, as always, we will take public comment before we close by 8. So that is our agenda. Any questions about the agenda for today?
Nope.
Great. Okay, and I think that Brooke is going to be joining us on behalf of the select board to talk about the data gathering and analysis plan when we get there, and she could also give us some updates on the fall town meeting planning when we get to that point. All right, so before we go any further, just a quick reminder on ground rules. We all have agreed to pretty elaborate ground rules about how we all behave and treat each other. We are recording this meeting as we do, and it will be posted. A link to it will be posted through the website for the committee, along with all the materials for today's meeting. We do ask everybody during this meeting to please remember to be respectful to each other and about anybody about whom we speak, to please be concise and try to keep comments short and to the point, not to repeat things we've already heard from other people, and lastly, to please try to be constructive at all times. So with that, I want to ask for approval of the meeting summaries. I know we got a few corrections on typos from our November 22nd and December 5th meeting summaries. But so to start there, did anyone have any substantive corrections on either of those summaries? Okay, so if we can get then approval, you can use the captions to give me a thumbs up, or you can give me a physical thumbs up for approval of those summaries.
Stacy, I'll make the motion to approve the meeting summaries.
Thank you.
Second.
Great. So all approve? Say aye or raise your hand. Great. Anyone disapprove? Okay. So those meeting summaries are approved. So I want to hold actually the approval of the public input summary, because we're going to actually walk through that in a little bit more detail, and we'll take any other comments on that if we need to make any other changes to that before we finalize that approval. And so with that, I think I'm going to, because Semanish did all the hard work of taking the 31 pages of notes that people submitted from their small groups and trying to synthesize it into this, this short and sweet summary. I'm going to ask her to present her synthesis to you all to get us started on that discussion. So Semanish.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a quick presentation on the public input summary. Obviously, I won't go into full detail as you guys have access to the summary, but we just wanted to go through it for those of you who weren't able to join us at the meeting. So just a quick overview of the demographics of people who were there. We had 284 members of the public register for the meeting. During that registration, we asked them to give us some information, like what's your relationship to Nantucket? What is your property ownership status, your neighborhood? What is your relationship to STRs? And then we had 183 people attending the public input session. That does include our short-term rental working group members. And I also want to note that some people were on the call with their spouses or members of their household. So it's not a perfect number, but we were able to pull from the 183 members some of the data that they gave us. So we had 89 seasonal residents, 66 year-round residents, 4 people who identified as other on the survey, and 24 others. In terms of property ownership status, we had 160 property owners, 10 renters, and 13 people who labeled themselves as other. We had people from lots of different neighborhoods. I won't read them all, but you can see them here, and they're also listed on the summary. And then in terms of relationship to STRs, people listed lots of different types of relationships: business owners, STR owners, renters, concerned neighbors, family members, lots of mixes and matches of all of those. So, and so for those of you who weren't there, we did this meeting a little bit differently than other public meetings I'm sure you've been to. In order to really encourage discussion and have people talking to each other, we split people up into small breakout rooms of about 5 to 8 people. And we assigned a note taker. So it was either one of our working group members. Obviously there were not enough for all the breakout rooms. So then we also asked members of the public to volunteer as note takers. And in the first small breakout room, we asked people to discuss what experiences they have had with short-term rentals on Nantucket, how people have been personally impacted by this, and what their hopes and concerns are for the future of STRs on Nantucket. So one of the biggest things that people brought up were their connection to Nantucket and their neighbors. People felt like this was a really tight-knit community, and they felt a lot of love and gratitude for this island and their ability to be a part of that. And they felt concerns not only about how the conversation of short-term rentals has created divisions, but other people noted that they felt like short-term rentals themselves were sort of diluting that community feeling on Nantucket. Many groups brought up their concerns about corporate entities and their want to regulate outside entities who are coming in just to buy a property, just to rent it. Several groups mentioned that, were we to have short-term rentals on Nantucket, they'd want that to be from people who felt a sense of community to the neighborhoods, a sense of community to the island, and sort of boots on the ground was the phrase that came up a couple of times. Some groups noted that they wanted more data, specifically how much of the rental market is owned by these corporate entities, how much money is going towards that, and how much of a problem is this really? Because some groups did note that they felt like they didn't really sense a lot of corporate entities, or they didn't see that on the island. Wealth considerations, several groups talked about how they felt like it was the quote ultra wealthy billionaires who were coming in and wanting to limit short-term rentals for everyone else. And they felt like the current short-term rental policies really favor these large corporate entities or businesses, or just people who had deeper pockets, and felt like there should be more of a balance on short-term regulation so that it impacts everyone equally. There was also a lot of discussion about available and affordable housing, and there was a lot of different opinions about how short-term rentals impact available and affordable housing. Community members shared stories about how, they've had to move to find more affordable housing. Other members shared stories of, they have year-round rentals and they're having a really hard time keeping prices down because the market keeps going up. Other people felt like they really did not see the connection between affordable housing and short-term rentals. And overall, people wanted data around what this relationship was, what trends we're seeing around the stock of available housing and how that's been impacted by short-term rentals. Multiple groups talked about traffic and noise. Some people shared stories about times where they've been inconvenienced by, traffic or noise complaints that they've had to make or didn't want to make to the police, but felt impacted by it. Other community members said it, they really haven't felt like it's been an issue. Many groups talked about economic impacts. People felt really fearful and nervous about how short-term rentals, how restricting and regulating short-term rentals is going to have an impact on not only the island's economy, but families, economic finances for people who need to rent out their properties to keep their homes, and really felt nervous about how regulations that this group puts forward or just in general to the town are going to have impacts on the community. Relationships with renters definitely came up. People shared stories about renters that they've had in the past that they've had issues with, or renters in the past that they've had for years and years, and it's been families that they have. And so people spoke to that. It seems like there was a general consensus that these online platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo have sort of lessened the vetting process for renters, and that it's the on-island realtors and stuff who do a good job vetting those, and that is something people have noticed. Multiple groups talked about population growth, how the island there's more people on the island, and that's having an impact on all of the issues that we're discussing in this group. And finally, registration. People talked about how a comprehensive and well-executed registration system for short-term rentals is important and useful. Then we brought everyone.
Maybe pause there for a second, Samina, yeah. And just to see, does anyone have comments or questions? Julia?
Thanks, Stacey. Thanks, Amanesh. When I read the input doc, it sort of all jives with what you're saying, and the different sort of topics that came up. One topic that I thought was a little more obscure, I guess, or confusing was this section called corporate entities. Mm-hmm. The title is corporate entities, and it seems to refer to the fact that there's strong support for limiting corporate ownership of STRs. Mm-hmm. But in the text, it actually sort of references it references in one section, references concerns about commercial entities and professional investors, which may or may not be corporations, I guess. And then a little later references absentee ownership. And so I think, I guess what I'm saying is there doesn't seem to be clear, it's not clearly, not everyone is clearly only concerned about corporate ownership. There seems to be this some people may only be concerned with corporate ownership. Some people may be concerned with absentee ownership. Some people may be concerned with somewhere in between. But I think the document doesn't make it very clear that that's what the content is referring to.
Samina, do you want to try and elaborate a little bit on that, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, you can jump in.
Yeah, I would say, Julia, this group has struggled with what corporate means. I think in looking over the notes, by far the most consistent theme was the idea of corporations or profit entities that own houses only to use them as STRs, and concern about that. That was, I think, fairly consistent. Probably one of the most consistent themes that we heard. I don't think we heard as when people did talk about concerns about absentee around noise and things like that as well. But I think we did not synthesize that in the conversation about corporate was really meant to focus on that particular theme. So if it's not clear, we can try to make sure that we are more clear in the write-up.
And I just want to lift up also that there is a well said point at the end of this document that I'll talk about later, which is that this group really needs to have strong definitions so that these issues are really cleared up and everyone's talking about the same thing.
If I can follow up quickly, Stacy,
Yeah.
It's not so much about the input, and I think the input was great. And I did get a couple comments from folks who didn't participate the whole time or who felt like they got put in a group where they were not able to speak freely. I think that's just a small community effect, like where, maybe in a small community, you have to have a little bit of local knowledge when you're teaming up people, because inadvertently you put folks who, who may not be able to open up in the same room together. So that was one aspect. But the other aspect is at the beginning of that meeting, you sort of elaborated on what options the group had come up in the big working session that we had together.
Yes,
prior
sorry,
meeting.
just to jump in, that's this discussion number 2 that we're about to get to.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is I had the feeling at the working meeting that we were just, each throwing spaghetti on the wall saying, this is what I think, right?
Yeah.
And the next person saying, this is what I think. At the input meeting, you made it sound like the work group had agreed on these options. And I just wanted to make sure that that was maybe just my interpretation of your words. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I meant to say, and we can, if I didn't, I apologize, but that these were the ideas that the group had been discussing and saw as most promising. Not that you are ready to codify them, but that they were the ones that kind of rose to the surface as ideas members of the group found very promising.
Thank
And
you.
worth exploring further. So hope that's clear. Peter?
Yeah, just if we have a little bit more information about the wealth considerations subject there, because I didn't really understand what issue was there returning regarding the wealth considerations. Maybe Stacy, you can explain that to me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
go
happy. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So there was a couple of groups who brought up this idea of the ultra wealthy billionaires who had a lot, if not a disproportionate say against STRs that were trying to sort of push out other homeowners who needed the rental income from their STRs.
Okay. So let me just so you're saying that these are people that are against STRs because they want to have a quiet neighborhood or something like that. And so they're pushing out people that want to rent their houses?
Yeah, and these were just things that were coming up in the groups.
Okay, okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea there was, as some people talked about, eliminating the ability to rent your home as a short-term rental will make it so that only the super uber wealthy will be able to afford these second homes, and people who don't need the rental income, right? And that was a concern for people.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy?
Just a quick question, not actually on the topic, but on the whole presentation. Since a lot of the synthesis is great and it gathers together, common thoughts, is it possible for us to have access to the individual feedback items that came in? Because that might help clarify what people actually said in certain cases, if we cared to look at it. Could that be made accessible to us?
It could be, yeah. I mean, we can share the 31 pages of notes. We would want to just make sure that we go through and redact names, because some people put names in there and we never told people we would be sharing their names. And there, as I look through the notes, there are a few places where the conversations didn't quite conform to our ground rules about respectfully speaking about people. And I feel like I would want to do something there. Maybe it's at least redact names of people who were, being spoken of in ways that were not quite to the level of respect we would like to see. So yeah, that would just take a little bit of work. But I just want to be clear that what we want to avoid is like generating different summaries, or right, like we don't want this to become a like I counted how many people said X and how many people said Y, right? Because I do think that, as you saw at the beginning, the demographics of who attended this meeting, this is not a representative sample of everybody who cares about these issues or who is affected by these issues. And so I just would want to put a real caution on that. And some groups put very detailed notes about what everybody said, and others, others were just like, here's a paragraph summary. Our group basically agreed X, right? So yeah, we'd have to really have some caveats around that, about how any of you might want to try to use that material. Okay, Samanish, going back to you here.
Okay, great. So in the second small groups, we did the same format. We put people into random breakout rooms to ask them, what do you like about the ideas being explored by the short-term rental working group so far? How would you add or improve them? And just to give people some reminders about, what those ideas that had been generated or brainstormed so far were to limit or eliminate quote unquote business STRs that had not been defined, but those not owned or operated by a natural person, adopting the 3% community impact fee, defining caps on the total number of STRs on the island, either by neighborhood or maybe by reducing overall numbers through attrition, protecting STR for locals and unique situations, such as some of your cottages, limiting the number of rental leases or weeks allowed per unit in high season, or limiting one STR rental per week per unit. So, and I do just want to give a little bit of a preface for this section. A lot of people did continue talking about their personal experiences and other topics. So these were really just the ideas we were able to pull based on these questions. But something that did come up a lot was the need to identify the problem. And a lot of community members noted that they felt like there had still not been a well-defined problem that was trying to be solved by this group. Some people didn't really see the relationship between the problems that had been brought up, like affordable housing and noise and STRs, and there was sort of a feeling of putting the cart before the horse, in a sense, and us wanting to really consider how that's going to impact the community and people's financial situation. Again, this is where people mentioned wanting and needing to use specific and coherent definitions. And other people felt like they did know what the problem was and wanted to share it here, which was that they felt like people had so much access to Nantucket, and that was really driving this issue. And that there was just a lot of overcrowding and overdevelopment that was happening, and that short-term rentals were getting mixed up into those bunch of problems. Rules of enforcement. Several groups expressed concerns about these approaches and ideas because of enforcement. They felt like there needed to be practical and reasonable enforcement considered in this process from the beginning, and felt like some of the more micromanaging type, like 1 week minimum options, were just not going to be realistic because they weren't going to be able to be enforced. And another group brought up, what the impacts of overregulation are, and that overregulation might lead to increased costs of short-term rentals, and make it harder for people with an actual connection to the island to come and visit. So in terms of the ideas that we had generated, caps, there was definitely some mixed feelings about caps and their effectiveness and feasibility. I think there were several groups who brought up the fact that they were confused about what caps would mean and what they would do, and how effective there was, and just wanted more information on that. And then there was another group who just didn't think that caps would work. And then one group had a question about, who would be the body or person to define the caps, determine their size and time, things like that. Grandfathering and sunsetting, one group felt, or at least one group, I think there's a couple of groups, felt like grandfathering and sunset rules should be used generously in these regulations. There was general positive feedback about the 1 week minimums. They liked having the idea of having the 1 week minimums during the high season. And one group felt that renting shorter periods than 1 week would allow for a more affordable island. A registry, a competent and effective registry, again, being brought up in this breakout group, or in this set of breakout groups, as felt like the monitoring that it would provide would be useful information, and would also give us good information about, nuisances and maybe like repeat offenders for the things people are talking about, and complaining about. The community impact fee, multiple groups liked the idea of having this fee, and felt like it would be awesome if it was put towards, put back into the community, which is obviously what it's for. I think there was a couple of groups who felt confused about what the community impact fee would be, and that they wanted it to be higher, although the community impact fee, it has to be 3%. But I think the idea of that is that they felt like there should be more than 3% of a fee that would go back to the community. Taxes. Some groups felt like homes used primarily or entirely for STR should be taxed like commercial property at commercial property tax rate. And one group suggested earmarking the rental tax revenue to subsidize affordable housing. Another group wanted to have monetary penalties attached to these policies to incentivize compliance. And some groups felt like there should not be any additional taxes, and that STRs are taxed enough on the island. And multiple groups brought up lawsuits, not only the ones that are currently going on and how they're going to impact this process, and whatever regulations we come up with, but also we're nervous about, maybe future lawsuits, and felt like there was a lot of urgency around this topic, because community members were scared of lawsuits, basically. And then another group mentioned they're concerned over new lawsuits because of these regulations, especially if year-round renters and seasonal renters were not treated equally. And then finally, there was a number of ideas that community members had suggested that we had not talked about. So I'll just list some of them now, but require that any new STR produce alternative energy or credits to overcome the need for infrastructure, allow solar to be installed in STR properties, incentivize multi-unit owners of STRs to rent long-term, limit the number of cars that STRs can bring to the island, like 1 car per X number of rooms, for example. Limit STRs to 1 property per person or entity. Multiple groups talked about the town and their responsibility. So the town should stop approving the construction of large homes, or the town can use some of the land that they own to build homes. Like tiny homes was the example they gave, or with compostable toilets for year-round workers. And, think about how to integrate successful examples from other places like Palm Springs and Atlanta, and their STR policies to implement to Nantucket. So that is my presentation. I will stop sharing.
Great. Peter?
Yeah, just 2 things. One is, after we did all this, maybe I started thinking, maybe we should have started out our whole concept by sending a survey out to the town and having everybody respond. Sending it out to every homeowner and having them respond. We're getting information, we're getting feedback, and we're getting it from this meeting. And the feedback I got from these meetings was very, very positive. The people that were participated really thought they were, technologically advanced, and as well as they were concrete. So that was good. But I do think that it might make sense to even now to do something, send it out to people. Number 2 is just when it comes to enforcement on anything. Right now on the Finance Committee, we're reviewing the articles, and we have a new article that wants to change the lighting regulations, and a new article that wants to change the sound regulations. And they all include hiring people to do these, to check the sound and check the light, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have, it's just, and it ends up when you're done that you can't enforce anything. So we got to think of anything that we do, how we can measure it in a real way, besides having somebody look at a piece of paper and say they're doing a long-term rental. I don't know the answer to this. I'm just suggesting.
Yeah, I think both of those good points, Peter. I think we'll talk more about public input as we go forward with more specific proposals that the group might be coming up with, and keeping the survey idea on the table. And then, yes, enforcement definitely seemed like a theme that a lot of people mentioned is, if we can't do enforcement, what are we doing? Make sure that's a consideration this group has in mind. Julia.
Thanks, Stacy. I thought it was interesting. Well, all the feedback's interesting, but one of the pieces that was interesting was that the majority or a good portion of the people thought that a 1-week minimum might be a good idea. And then I realized, the majority of the feedback's coming from seasonal residents or homeowners. And it might have been interesting to understand if you were renting as part of this group, like, were you mostly renting the entire property, or were you renting a part of the property? Because, the year-round residents, in my experience anyways, year-round residents who are renting part of their home, let's say it's even a cottage, or an accessory dwelling, or a garage apartment, whatever you want to call it, the 1-week minimum would be a problem in some of these cases where really, they're not set up to be, they're kind of like the true Airbnb in some of these cases, right? There's not even a kitchen or anything like that. So it's not like someone would show up for a very long period of time. But anyways, I thought that was interesting. And I think I sort of agree with Peter that it would be really interesting if we had sort of like, statistically significant information, I guess, on the survey results.
Yeah. And just to be clear, when we presented the 1-week minimum, the way that it was framed was that you could only do 1 short-term rental each week, not that each short-term rental must be the duration of a full week.
Understood.
Right. And not all the small groups necessarily caught that or agreed exactly with that. It's a little hard to tell with some of the notes, but that was the prompt, was really about that you couldn't do multiple rentals to different people in 1 week.
And maybe that makes more sense with the results then.
Yeah. Kathy.
So just quickly back to the slide that talked about the community impact. I just think we need to clarify amongst ourselves and make sure we understand that, because I think that, I mean, the law actually states what you can charge and who it applies to. It's a Massachusetts law. There's no flexibility. We either use it or don't use it. So it's unfortunate that people weren't aware of that when they were making their suggestions. So just that. And I also appreciate, Stacy, your clarification on the once per week versus, because I think there was a lot of discussion, at least in my group and some of the others I heard, where people were concerned about, especially the shoulder seasons when there were weddings and so forth. And you have people that would come in for a wedding for the weekend, and with only so many hotel rooms, you can't possibly house these folks unless it's allowed to be less than a week. So that's just what I heard. So thank you.
Yeah. A lovely point of shared view with Julia. Yes, and I think the community impact fee, I mean, we did explain what it was and that it was fixed by law, but again, it was a lot of people in a short public meeting, so not everybody was able to absorb all of the details. John?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. First of all, Sumesh, I thought you did an incredible job putting all this together, because, when I think back as to what that evening was like, in a good way, it was pretty chaotic. There was way more people than we ever thought. And I was wondering how this summary was going to come out. And it, I thought you did a great job. So thank you for that. What I'd like to just talk about a bit, Stacey, is, okay, so we've got this, and I can't say exactly in 100% in the town's history, but this is the largest group of public, people coming to a 2-3 hour meeting, whatever it was. I think we should feel really good about that. And it was well organized and exceeded my expectations anyway. But my question is this, I hope we can get this out to the 280 people that registered, at least, because if we get it out to them, for sure, the Inky and Current will pick it up from there. So this is a little bit, I think, though, long for that general kind of distribution. And so my question is there a way to get something out relatively quickly to all those people that did attend with a thank you? Maybe giving them this, but then something like the slides you did for those people who really don't want to wade through it all. Because I think we'd be missing an opportunity if we don't really go back to those people that took the time to participate.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, John. I'm curious what others think about a simple send this to the 284 people. I think, Semanish, we have their emails in order for them to have signed up for the webinar. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think we, if I'm remembering right, sent a follow-up message to the people who came to the meeting, but not to the full 280 something.
Okay, so we can easily send this summary, which is, 6 pages with then the list of names as a 7th page. I think it's pretty readable, but John, I also, I'm open. I'm curious if people think putting together more of an executive summary version, or even just, like this, the slides are also on the website. We could send people the slides as well as this. So just curious what other people think. And I'm going to take Karen's comment up because she has her hand up, but then John will come back to this suggestion to hear from the group. So Karen?
I just had a couple things. One is in the write-up, under 1 week minimums, it says one group liked the idea and then one group liked shorter periods. So I was confused. Is that accurate, or is it the majority of people liked the 1 group meet the 1 week minimum?
Yeah, I think that's a good question that, I don't know, Semanish, maybe we can go back and do just a confirmation rather than just saying what one group and one group said, and make sure that we're giving
Yes.
a bit more synthesis.
If it came up in more and that was a majority, because that's a strong finding if that's actually the case,
Yeah,
as opposed to whether it was just kind of in one group that it was that clearly stated.
yeah. And we
So-
want to make sure that we're framing it not as 1 week minimum, but as once per week, right? I think that might, that way of framing it is probably more clear.
Yeah, so just to see what, and then my other comment is about just that we've been talking about how we can enforce all of these things and who's going to enforce it and resources needed to enforce it and so forth as part of it. But I keep thinking we need to back up and look at, and I'm sure we'll do this when we get to the specific ideas or levers, but each one, why are we doing it? What is the exact point of that particular intervention? What is it that we're hoping to gain from doing that specific thing? How can we measure if it's accomplishing that? Is that possible to measure? Whether it's hurting or helping, what are the unintended consequences? What are the logistical repercussions? Just in terms of we can see how it's hard to put these things in place already.
Yeah.
And so, going forward, making sure that we're really drilling down on that in addition to the enforcement aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, Karen, when we get to those discussions, we're going to want to do that, right? Frame out exactly, here's the idea, here's what we think it will accomplish, here's some things we might not know or might want to learn more about, right? Go through and have a bit of a systematic framework for those proposals. That's a nice idea. Thanks. Kathy?
I thought you were going to go back to John, but anyway,
I will, yeah.
Yeah, I was basically going to kind of just comment on that. I think that information out to the public, especially those that took the time to participate, is really a great idea. What I would suggest is some people like to look at the top level synopsis and some people want to get into the weeds. So I don't see any reason why not just putting them out there and people can read whichever they choose to read. So that's all I wanted to share with that.
Yeah. And when you say that, Kathy, do you mean the 31 pages of notes, or do you mean the 6-page summary?
No, the 6-page summary and the presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I think the notes I think would be for us because it might help us clarify what somebody was saying when you see the actual words. Maybe they're not the actual words. Obviously, the person who took the notes has their own, but it just might be helpful. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Anyone else want to weigh in on that idea? So I think the proposal is that we send this and the presentation to the 200, the summary. Well, first we're going to clarify the 1 week minimums piece there. And then we're going to send the revision. We also got a few suggestions on typos, so we'll fix those as well. But once we do that, we would send it to the 284 registrants along with this presentation to, thank them for having signed up and share this. And I think let them know there will be more opportunities for public input as this group goes forward. So that's a proposal. So hopefully these hands that are up want to speak to that. Jim?
Yes, I think it's a really good proposal. I think we should send both. I do think just the slideshow without Semanish's gloss on it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I might be wrong on that. But so I would put that second, but I don't know. I think the 6 pages really do a good job, and it would be great to have the shorter version too, but the 6 pages are worth more because it goes into the actual actual issues.
Great, thanks. Dave? You're muted, Dave.
Couple things I 100% agree with everyone, Jim, everyone that says we should put it out there. And kind of backtracking to the names and redaction, town doesn't usually redact these things. They're public meetings, it's public information. So usually the town lets those things fly. And Megan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she'll agree. And secondly, it would be nice if we could also put it somewhere where the public could get it. Even if they didn't come to the meeting and if they're interested, that they could get their hands on this. And I know that it might be worth talking to someone in the town building. A lot of times they have like a little sidebar on the website, interested in STRs, bingo, hit it. And then that would bring this information up. So I just think that we should not preclude the rest of the public from having access to it if they want to see it.
Yeah, and it's already on the website. It's on the short-term rental, our group's website.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
In terms of the redaction, sorry, I just want to say, this was not your average public meeting. People were not speaking in front of the full public body. They were speaking in small groups. The groups were not videotaped. And so I'm really not comfortable having people's name, and the person who was taking notes took like, so-and-so came here in this year, and then they this and that, right? It's personal stuff that I just don't see that there's any need for us to put people's names out. That's all. Yeah. So Julia?
Didn't you also make it clear that people would not be attributed any sort of specific comments?
Yeah, I mean, I probably did because we typically do not, right? And so, yeah, I would be extremely uncomfortable sharing the version that had people's names, and I see no value to doing so. So, and even the ones that have names, mostly it's not like so-and-so feels this way about STRs. Their names are about when people went around and talked about themselves, and they're like, connection to the island and how they, that kind of stuff. And it just doesn't, I don't think that would be appropriate at all.
I'm just going to add that people also would say their addresses, and we're also probably going to redact those.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like, people are very comfortable with us sending this revised summary to the people who registered for the workshop, along with the PowerPoint slides. And then we can, as Tom points out here in the chat, as we sort of figure out what our next steps for public input, we can make that clear to them as well. At the very least, let them know that there are going to be more opportunities for their input. Sound good?
Good.
Great. Okay, so anything else about the public input sessions that people want to raise at this point? And then we'll otherwise move on to talking about, we're going to talk about data gathering, but Brooke is not going to be able to be with us until 6:15. And I know that she wanted to speak about it, but we can at least, we could get started. But does anyone have any other comments about the public session? And John, appreciated all your comments about positive feedback. I know we heard from a number of you just sending messages afterwards saying you felt like overall the format was really valuable, that you've been getting good feedback, and people really appreciated the opportunities. Okay. All right. Well, so with that, let's shift to the conversation about the plan for data gathering and analysis. We sent out a draft description of process and timeline for data analytics. this was primarily created by the town. And so maybe what we could do is leave if we start with the key data questions piece, and then we'll come back up to the process piece when Brooke is able to join us, if that'd be okay. So these data questions are really just an elaboration of the questions that we had shared and discussed at our in-person meeting on the 5th of December. And I was asked to sort of put them in the form of questions that could then be helpful for the scope of work for the town's data analytic expert that they're going to be hiring. And, you know, at the bottom here was something about economic data as well that I know, Kathy, you had asked about that we could talk about further. I don't know whether that fits into the contract of the data analytics expert that's being hired. I think that expert scope of work is really focused on the short-term rental data, but yeah, want to open the floor to sort of questions or conversation about these key data questions. Julia.
I guess just to back up, I want to make sure I understand the reason that the town is hiring someone is because they're going to get data from NARAB and data from Granicus, and Granicus isn't necessarily in a position to do the analysis. Is that what the situation is?
Yeah, I mean, Brooke can speak more to this, but I can say that, you know, the group has raised concerns about the data it's gotten and the format in which that data was shared, that and basically that Granicus's contract was never designed to be the data analytic expert for this group. That's not the contract that they're under with the town. That the work that they are doing for the town is around the registry and the collecting of data for the registry. And so given the detailed data requests that this committee has, there was an understanding from the town that they needed a designated independent data analyst who could work in a way that is responsive directly to this committee, to this work group, to answer your questions. I will raise the question of the NARAB expert, and, you know, if this group felt that you don't need an independent data analytic expert, that is, if you felt like, no, we're content to be working with NARAB's expert and Granicus, and there's not a need for an independent expert, that would be fine for you to share if that was how you felt as well. But it was my sense that an independent expert who is not under contract to NARAB, you know, because I think NARAB's expert is helping NARAB not only collect this data for this group, but is also helping them create their own portal, and they have their own scope of work that's working directly and accountable to NARAB, not to this group.
So just so I understand, the data that would be coming to this person or consultant group would be coming from NARAB and from Granicus and potentially other sources, I assume, like the registry, or like, you know, I mean, I'm assuming there are definitely other sources of data. Is that they would be an aggregator, not a creator of data?
Exactly. They would. Dave, do you want to speak to this? You're muted still.
Yeah, briefly, just my understanding, and I spoke to Penny about it the other day. 11, the biggest 11 offices have agreed to participate, which is really good. You know, the big thing is the data, and each office owns their own data, and they're very touchy about it. So they've set up a system where The person that's doing their data has a portal, and each separate office goes to that portal and downloads their information. So no one else sees it but the data person. And it's my understanding that that data person is dealing just with the NARAB data. And what the town representative or the person the town is hiring is going to take the data that comes from NARAB, the data that comes from Granicus, and combine them into a workable form. So we have all the information in one place. And unless unless Brooke comes on and says different, that's my latest understanding about the process.
I'm just going to follow up super quickly, Dave, because my last question is not, it's just a comment, I guess, and I don't know what the answer is, but if that person is an aggregator and an analyst, right, which is great, I think that's great. It's garbage in, garbage out, right? And assuming that NARAB is doing its, work diligently, it sounds like.
I think they are.
If we have some serious concerns about Granicus, what do we do about that?
Well, I think we'll have an opportunity to, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to see both sets of data and then them combined. I don't have an answer for that.
But the reality is, like, NARAB is one set of data, and the reason NARAB is even at the table is because they don't generally, the large majority of those listings are not on the online platforms, right? And Airbnb and Vrbo and whatnot, they represent sort of the other, call it half, not quite half, but it's a big chunk. And if we don't feel comfortable with that data, it poses an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that I'm not sure that there's that large of I think a lot of people use both, to be honest, but, and I'm not going to argue, you could be correct, but, I'm confident that the NARAB data will not be junk in, junk out. And Granicus, we'll see. There will be, I think there'll be a lot of reconciliation going on between the two data sets to make sure that there's not repetition in units being counted more than once and properties. And so I think that it's not going to be a simple process, but I think that having some guarded concerns is healthy. Julie, I don't think you're off base.
Yeah, Megan, you just shared something in the chat. Do you want to speak to this?
Sure. So I spoke with Brooke earlier today, and I'm sure when she joins us, she can elaborate further because she's really spearheading the procurement of this town-sponsored data analyst. But the intent is really to find a non-biased party that can compare and contrast and merge together anything that Granicus has produced with anything that NARAB has produced, so that you all are evaluating the most unbiased and comprehensive results. So that's really the intent of procuring the town's data analyst, or the town procuring a separate independent data analyst.
Yeah, and I do think, this group can say if there are things you want to see in this scope of work for the data analyst that the town is going to procure, that will help you feel comfortable, right? The whole point is we're going through this whole exercise and we want there to be data that people find credible and salient and legitimate, right? Because we want it to be able to help us inform decision-making for the group as a whole. So we do want your thoughts about how to do that. We do think that, an independent person, that's a good starting point. But what else do you feel like would be helpful that would help make sure that you feel at the end of the day that the data that's being shared by this data analyst to the group is credible, legitimate, and salient? Kathy?
Just a couple thoughts. I think data is very difficult. It's very difficult to take data that's sourced from disparate sources and put it together. there's a technology kind of component that you need to have to be able to do that effectively, and you need the contextual component. So my concern here is that, thank you, Brooke, for pulling this together. I don't think that's really your bailiwick. That's not what your passion is, and that's not what you know. I think it would be helpful to have some members from this group be part of that process. And I'll certainly volunteer, and people might say, well, you're too controversial or whatever, but I spent 40 years. I'm an IT person, I'm a database analyst, and that's what I know. So what I'm seeing is scaring me, because I think what I've seen from the Granicus data is their data algorithms and mechanisms are geared towards compliance. That's what they do. That's how they make their living. They go scour the world of the internet, and they find people who are under the table doing short-term rentals or whatever, and they're not registered. So that's really what their software is geared to do. It's not geared to find the kind of data that is historical in nature. My understanding is NARAB will go back, I think to 2018 and be able to show all these points of time. And Granicus, from what I understand, they scraped the data. When they did it for us last time, it was done in October, which is not a representative time of year for us. And they can't go back in time and look at what happened back then. So I don't see how they'll be able to really blend the data and have it make sense. So I think that's a real challenge. And I think that it would be really, I won't feel comfortable personally, unless we have some involvement from this group in the process, maybe not necessarily the selection of the people or whatever, but just to say, hey, you might want to think about this, or what about this, or how do you, that kind of thing. So that's one point. And then the other thing I wanted to just bring up here, because we're talking about data, is additional data elements that may be useful. And I'm bringing these up. They're kind of related to, I know there's short-term rental articles out there. I know the planning board and everybody in the town is going to say, please don't adopt these, I think is what is the terminology, because we want this to let the short-term rental work group do their thing. And I think that's extremely important. And I really appreciate that the town giving us the time and getting the data that we need to do this. But I think there are data elements, for example, in some of those short-term rental proposals, not the levers we have proposed, but have to do with things like how many days somebody spends in their home. Well, that's a piece of data that nobody has. The town doesn't have it. NARAB doesn't have it. It's not something that you would track in any of the online portals. So there may be other things that we need, and we also definitely need to know, like Karen said, if we pull this switch and pull this lever, what's going to happen, or what's likely to happen? And if we do that, what are the impacts? Who will be impacted by that kind of change? Because, otherwise we're just, we're creating a law where we have no idea. It's irresponsible to me to put out something where you don't know or don't have a theory about what's going to happen if you do that. So the impact analysis needs to include those elements of all those levers that we're pushing. And that's what I'm afraid of, is we'll collect all the data of the past, but we don't have any way to see what will happen or what could happen in the future if we pull any of those levers that we've put out on the screen. So those are like a brain dump. Sorry, it was like 12 points.
Yeah. So can I just go back and talk about this for a second with you, Kathy? Because the first thing you talked about was some involvement of this group in the data process. And I guess I'm curious what exactly. So let me just first say, we did some follow-up with the town attorney, John Giorgio, who made very clear that anything that more than one work group member is part of is a subgroup. Anything approved by this body to have members of this group sort of work on the behalf of this group is a subgroup, and all meetings that occur then must be open meetings. They must be posted. They must have minutes, all of that. all of the rules of open meeting law. So I just want to make sure that as you are making suggestions, that it's premised by that, that is the legal requirement according to the town's attorney. So as you are thinking about, Kathy, what it is you are hoping members of this group can do, keep in mind that it will have to be done all in open meetings that are posted in advance. John, you want to speak to that particular?
Yeah, because I feel why one of the reasons that we need some involvement, Stacey, is that, you know, the timing of our data has gone back and back and back. You know, I remember, you know, we had that first open subgroup data meeting was, I don't know, like, I think it was October 18th, you know, 15 weeks ago. And now we're talking about not really having the final data till mid-April. So what I would like, actually, it could be all of our group, have the opportunity to meet with these people, you know, Brooke, the data analyst, Penny, Jeffrey, you know, regularly, that we have the opportunity to have an update conversation with them at an open meeting to see where are they, and is this still coming on the timeline that we have? If not, why not? What can we do to make up the time? Because, you know, it might just be me, Stacey, but I feel like the work group, the data part of this is so critical to us, but it's been a black hole in terms of information. You know, some people seem to know a little bit more about what's going on than others, but we should all know exactly what has been going on. And that hasn't been the case. And that's fine. We're learning, you know, we're turning the page into this new year. But I would really like us as a group, and if everybody doesn't feel like they need to show up, that's okay. But have that opportunity. And by regularly, I hope we end up reinstituting our bi-weekly meetings. And this could be one of the things that happens at those meetings.
Yeah. So just, John, just to speak to that for a second, is that if you will get to the timeline in a minute. Oh, Brooke is with us. So Brooke, if we invite you to turn on your camera, is that they don't expect a selection of the vendor until late February or early March. So
It says February 20.
It says February 20th. Yeah.
But that would be what, you know, sorry, but let me just use as an example.
Yeah.
You know, we ought to, if we're meeting every other week, just to hear where, and I don't mean that we should be influencing the data. That's not what I mean. It's, okay, guys, here's what your plan was. Are we still on it or not? So if we get to February 20 and we haven't found the right person, I think we want to know that then, not 3 weeks later from somebody somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pause there for a second, if that's okay. So Brooke, welcome. Thank you for being here. We were very efficient in our earlier conversation, so we got into this a little early. And the group has been talking a little bit about the data process and timeline, and particularly about roles and responsibilities of group members. They understand that this can't be done as sort of just non-public meetings, but that some way and timeline in which the group is actively involved with this data analysis process, so that they feel comfortable with what's happening. So if I can sort of hand to you to speak on this a little.
Sure. To start out, I was asked by the select board, we had a discussion, gosh, a number of weeks ago about the procurement of data, the analytics of data, and the sources of data. And the select board clearly wanted an independent and objective analyst to look at the data and work with you all to build as much public trust around the data that will be used to support your decision-making. And so I was asked, or I volunteered, or was volunteered, or I can't remember exactly what happened, to work through the procurement process for said objective town paid data analyst and resource for this group. So that took time for the following reasons. The procurement process has to have dates and deliverables and a scope of work. And that process could not start until NARAB had established their process and their scope of work and determined what data they would be producing or able to produce from their data sets. So I've been in communication with Penny Dye of NARAB as they've walked through their process of scoping out their work, getting proposals from vendors, and they're close to executing a contract with the vendor for their work. And that drove a timeline as to when your analyst, the town's analyst, would have a data set from them to work with. And the idea is to marry the data that comes from NARAB with the information that's come from Granicus, and have the questions that I believe you all have been working on that Stacy's shared with me, that you're hoping the data will help you answer. The other piece of the whole timeline of this, to not set a timeline, was to ensure when special town meeting was going to be scheduled, and therefore be able to work backward on the timeline of when your deliverable for warrant articles would be. And that couldn't get determined until we had a date for special town meeting. So I've been diligently working to try to put together all of these pieces of the puzzle. It does not come easily. I can tell you for special town meeting, the elements that have to be put together are the school district and their staffing, closing because the schools have to be closed for setup, the town moderator schedule, the e-voting vendor, the select board summer schedule and days we don't meet to be able to work out the timeline, the technology vendor that coordinates the visuals and the broadcast on NCTV 18. So you're talking about gathering a whole bunch of people who have to agree on a date. And frankly, the schools are the hardest piece of the puzzle because they're in school. And this town meeting has to work around them. So that said, it looks as though we have there is a date of November 7th, which the select board will be looking at to approve at our meeting tomorrow night. And I believe all the pieces are in place for a November 7th special town meeting. And I've been working with the Plus department and town administration and trying very hard to work a backward schedule to come up with the deadline for you guys to submit articles. And I'm going to say I was working on this afternoon, and it looks like July 12th would be sort of the final date for your articles to come to the select board for consideration. There will be room after July 12th, give or take. Obviously, this schedule is still subject to approval, and it has not been vetted by town administration yet. This is just me working with the Plus department on planning board hearings and FinCom hearings and trying to figure out what the actual timeline will
Brooke,
be.
11/7 is election day.
There's no election this year, so we're able to use that date, and the
Okay.
schools are already closed.
Thank you.
So that was part of we had eliminated 11/7, and then we realized there was no actual election this year. So it was reserved as a day off from school already, which turned out to be a kind of a bonus. Anyway, there will be a time period between when your group submits articles to the select board for review, and there'll be a number of weeks before the select board finalizes the warrant. So there will be some room for discussion at select board meetings around the articles. So this November timeline really, I was very worried because they were looking at early October timelines, and it was a really compressed timeline for you all, given the timeline that NARAB now has for their data project and their production of their data set. So I feel as though it's coming together, and I'm sorry some of you felt in the dark on that. It was just really a lot of catching a lot of balls in the air and trying to put it together. It's not as simple as one might think. And that's sort of my answer to everyone about what it's like to be a select board member. Everything's more complicated than I ever knew it would be. So anyway, that's, my job is that. So the next steps are that NARAB has yet to actually execute their contract with their vendor. Until they do, they will not have a final timeline. And of course, in this day and age with COVID, all timelines are fungible, given that, a data team could all get COVID and lose time. So, but I want to read you a statement that I got from Penny today. And this is a quote: NARAB will be providing verifiable data on vacation rentals for the community to use in decision-making. It is important that the community understands the full picture of vacation rentals on Nantucket. Included amongst the data and compilations are how many properties, where they are, size and capacity, types of ownership, including multiple properties, and most importantly, how and when and for how long they are used, whether by the owners or vacationers. So I think that I came in right as Kathy was asking a question. So it looks as though they're going to be getting a lot of that data for their clients. They obviously have privacy concerns about individualized data. And so NARAB has interviewed multiple consultants, as in the process of negotiating a contract. So I expect to hear from them soon. I thought it was going to be this week. It isn't. Things don't always go the way I wish they would. And then once that is done, then the town of Nantucket can scope out the work for the analytics for your group, which is what I talked about earlier, taking the NARAB data, taking the Granicus data, your questions, writing up a scope of work with deliverables and deadlines. And that process by procurement is that scope of work is then issued to at least 3 vendors who are in the normal business of doing this type of work. And then those proposals are evaluated and a vendor is selected. And I believe, as I'm understanding, the data set from NARAB is going to come at the end of their work. So we're not going to have access to it piecemeal. It's not something that we can cross over and be working simultaneously. Their data will come out, and where there might be crossover or ability to start the town of Nantucket analytics piece, I'm hopeful that the NARAB vendor will agree to meet with the town vendor in their process, just to make sure that when they're bringing the Granicus data in, it's aligned in terms of how it's organized, so that they can be married quickly once the NARAB data is produced, and that then a fulsome, clean set of data is available for reporting out in the service of answering the questions that you hope it will answer for you. So I hope that's really helpful to all of you in terms of what I've been up to and what my role was, and why it's taken this long, and what's coming, to the best of my ability to predict at this point. So happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Brooke. And just to be clear, I think, as you were saying, the timeline we sent around that suggested that the NARAB's contract was going to be finalized the week of January 23rd has been pushed back at least a week or two already. So, Kathy?
Just a couple of questions. So first, thank you, Brooke, for stepping into the breach here. I know it's a ton of work, and I know preparing for any kind of town meeting is a logistical nightmare. So understand what's going on here. also want you to be successful. And so the thing that jumps out at me, having spent 45 years in the business of IT procurements and data analysis and actually trying to get the data that your end users need, I'm now sitting in the end user seat along with everybody else on this call. We're the people who are going to consume the data and use it. So what I learned over the years is that there has to be an involvement with the folks who are going to use the data every step of the way. Otherwise, you get to the end and you don't have what you need or what you want, especially when the data is something that all of us here in this group understand pretty well. An IT consultant will know data, but they won't know our data that's associated with this island. So I think some sort of involvement, and I know we have the open meeting laws. I know there's got to be ways that we can work with you and NARAB and Granicus to make sure to ask the right questions so that when this does come together, it's not one of those things that just crosses like this and doesn't meet. So that would be a disaster if we got to that point and we wait until March or April to not have any interchange and then say, oh, this doesn't match up, it doesn't line up, it's different, it's the same data element, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Those kinds of things. It's really in the weeds, but that's my concern. And I'm just hoping that there can be some way that we can brainstorm and figure out a way that we can get some folks involved in this process while it's happening.
So can I, Stacy, is it okay if I?
Yeah,
So
please.
I think there's one thing that we have to understand is that the NARAB data is their data. It's proprietary data.
Yep.
We don't get to pick and choose. So they will be supplying us with data and we will likely get more detail once their contract is signed as to the specifics of the sources of that data. They are seeking some public sources as well as their own proprietary data. So that will be, it is intended to have that included in the scope of work. And then also, I do think that so I am not, public procurement is different from private procurement in a whole lot of ways. But I've done this through the Affordable Housing Trust. And so I think having this group vet the scope of work before it goes out to vendors makes a lot of sense. But we have to be careful about procurement and not breaching procurement protocol. So there's still some questions I have to ask of the Chief Procurement Officer, Brian Turbot, on how that might be done. But I think that's one way, is to bring a draft of the scope to this group. And then y'all can weigh in on what might be missing for you in terms of what you're hoping to achieve with that from that vendor. So hopefully
here's another idea. I know when I mentioned data elements, we one of the things that Stacy brought up earlier is that we have to be very careful in how we define terms, especially if we're going to write zoning laws. We're going to have words and understand short-term rental means this, long-term rental means this, and we need to have those things defined. You need the same kind of thing when you're talking about data. So defining a data element that you call X in the NARAB data and calling it X in the Granicus data does not mean it's the same thing. So if we can help in any way in helping define those data elements and making sure that everybody understands what they mean, those are the kinds of things. I don't think they're just expertise that this group may have that we can offer, and we feel we want to offer it. Some of us want to offer it, and so that we don't run into a brick wall or potentially run into a brick wall and then everybody looks bad.
Yeah, and I think part of what I envision in terms of having the two data vendors coordinating toward the end of the NARAB project. I mean, they have sought to bring the data together in a way that works for them. It's a private enterprise, right? So we're going to be having the town's vendor hopefully understanding how that's presented to make sure any additional data that we're bringing in does in fact it's described the same way, it means the same thing. So when it's aggregated, it makes, it's accurate. So.
And is Granicus going to be, who is going to be getting the data that's not in the NAREB database?
So as far as I know, there is a data set that Granicus has. We need to know what's in the NAREB data and what is potentially out there. That's why this is, it takes some time to pull this together. So, I mean.
Well, all we've seen is a data set that was a snapshot in October. Because they can just look at what's real time right now. They can do a snapshot right now, but they can't go back and get historical data. So
and there's some data that's simply not going to be available, and that's true, and that is not available in the time frame. So, hopefully, I mean,
their DNA has it, I think.
All right. Well, we can figure out what's missing when we draft the scope, when we know what NAREB has, and as we draft the scope.
And, I think it seems like a perfect opportunity to have a subgroup meeting, because I imagine not everybody wants to be deep in the weeds on these things, but everybody is welcome. But it also gives us some flexibility for when the draft scope of work is actually ready for the group. So Brooke, once you know that, you can let me know, and we can then schedule a subgroup meeting for those who want to review the draft scope of work. Other members who can't come are welcome to send in their comments. And we could have a subgroup meeting. We can share that input from the group. Brooke, to you before you finalize the scope. Does that sound
Yeah, I mean,
doable?
that makes a lot of sense. I just want to be careful in talking to the leadership in the planning department that staff resources are not unlimited. We're in the process of a town meeting that's coming in, deep in the process of a town meeting that's coming in the spring. So I think being as efficient as possible with waiting for information to be ready before a meeting is held, so that an outcome can be achieved without multiple meetings that hang on pieces of information that aren't yet ready. We need to think about the allocation of plus department staff resources as well for these public meetings.
Thanks, Brooke. Okay, Jim.
Thanks. Thank you, Brooke, for that presentation. I want to look a little past where we're talking about now to when we actually hire the independent data analyst. And I see some hope there. I think that we will need to have a really in-depth, good meeting with him or her and try to get them to understand in detail why we want to look at these different data points, these different questions. And in particular, I realize that NAREB is going through their process, but in particular, I'm hoping that this person, who I guess will not be bound by open meeting law, but I'm hoping that that person would be able to meet with the Granicus representative. As a data analyst, him or herself, they may be able to speak the same language. I feel sometimes when I try to speak to Jeffrey, wonderful guy, but I think the vocabulary is different. But if our data analysts can understand our concerns and translate them into Granicus talk, maybe we can get more data that we really need. That's all, simple point.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that the data professionals, and I would say there are three here. There's NAREB's, the independent for the town, and then Granicus, who we hoped would, there was some hope that they would serve this role, but it became clear to me that this group wasn't comfortable with them. And that's when this conversation came up at the select board about executing a contract to hire someone else that would build a more robust data set.
And so I'm just saying that having a data analyst who's really good with data or data, whatever it is really important, but also someone who can interpersonally can communicate. I think that will be a very important part of this job, is the communication with the two groups.
We can put that in the scope.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
And Jim, just to talk to your point about timing, right? That was the idea. What we were suggesting, March 14th was probably a realistic time frame where the data expert would have started work and had some of those preliminary conversations prior to meeting with this group. I think it makes no sense to meet with the selected data person before they've gotten to get the lay of the land and spoken to Granicus and to
Sure.
NARAB's expert, right? But to make sure that we talk to them early enough, still in their process, so that they really can understand from this group what your needs are beyond what was written in the scope of work.
Perfect. Thank you.
John?
Yeah. So, Brooke, all I want to make sure is, looking beyond the scope of work, is that as we move through these next 10 weeks or so, that we do have an opportunity to understand how it is going with Granicus, with NARAB, the town data analyst. I get it that, that we need to be sure that the times that we meet are the correct ones. But I just don't want to go into another 4, 5, 6 weeks of a kind of a black hole where we, the work group, don't really know whether we're on this schedule or not, or what's happened. Because it's such a, this is a critical thing that is holds up a lot of our work. So I hope you'll think about how we can pass the scope of work, how we can have regular communication somehow as open meeting to understand how this whole process is going.
So, I'm here today to all I would have been able to tell you before this week was I'm talking to a lot of people and nothing's been decided. So I don't know whether that would have been helpful for me to say that. If it would have been, I'm sorry I didn't. However, I'm not sure it necessarily needs a meeting, John, but I would commit to regular updates on how the process is going and whether whether the timeline is shifting in any way, or whether deliverable dates have changed, et cetera, et cetera. So I would commit to regular updates.
To all of us, Brooke, to all of us.
Yeah, through us. Yeah, I think we could send weekly updates to the group, and we would do the work. Semanish and I will, track down Brooke and track down Penny and track down Granicus and whatever other things we might be waiting on, in order to be able to send you all, here's an update for this week. How does that sound, John?
Yeah.
Great. David.
Thank you. I just have a concern with us getting too granular here and getting caught up in the process. I think that we have a pretty good list of data points that we want to be addressed, and of course we can go back and modify those, in the next little bit of time. But I think for us to get involved with the data people in any level is a huge mistake. We should let them do their work. And when we receive the work, if there's more data points we want, then we ask. Or if we're not comfortable with the data we get, then we make adjustments. But to get this granular this early and is just, I feel, a mistake. So I just I want these guys to get to work and get us some stuff instead of us trying to manipulate the process. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Can I just ask, though, clarification? Do you feel comfortable with the idea of once the person is procured and has met with NAREB, the sort of the framework laid out in this draft process timeline, that they come and they meet the group, they
Oh,
hear
yeah.
things. Okay, all of that sounds
100%.
good.
I just don't want, I just think if we meddle with it, then it's going to take longer, and we need to get the answers before we ask more questions.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Kathy?
Just going back to a point I was in the middle of making, and then when Brooke joined us, just want to pick up on that thread again, that's all. Back to the economic impact analysis, which we said is just a one-liner there. Do we have any plans to further define what we need there, and would that be part of the scope of work, so that we know when we put a policy out there, what its potential impacts are to the town and to, whatever?
So let me start by saying, I don't, and Brooke, you can jump in here, but I don't think the scope for this STR data analyst is going to include economic analysis. Kathy, you had asked for further economic analysis. I think this group can talk about what it is you most would want, that people think it is reasonable to get in the weeks that we have. And then we'd have to figure out what it would take to get that. Because I think if you're asking for town resources to find someone who's going to do that work, I think that's going to have to go to the town, obviously.
Okay, well, just, I know when you go before FinCom and you have an article, typically the FinCom folks want to know, what's this going to cost to the town? Is it going to impact the finances of the town? Things like that. So I just think that we need to have those answers, or have a way to address them.
Great.
Like any other citizen would.
Brooke, and then we can go to Peter.
Well, I
Brooke?
think probably
Sure.
Peter can answer that better than anyone, but as a member of FinCom, but clearly, if there were to be a dramatic change in the number of short-term rentals based on a proposal from this group, the finance department would be the best place to ask for an analysis in terms of the revenue implications. I think further economic analysis about the overall economy of the island, I don't know that that's achievable in the time frame you all have, but certainly in terms of the impact on the revenue stream to the town. If some estimate of the change in the number of short-term rentals were even achievable based on a direction this group was going, were possible. I don't know. I'm not an economist, so but certainly the finance department might be able to weigh in on potential impact on local rooms tax revenue.
Peter, do you want to speak to that?
You're muted.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. There's much more than just the impact the taxes are going to have. That's one thing, but I mean, there's major economics that can be affected if we cut short-term rentals by 30% or by 20%, whatever the number is. And I don't know, that number is not available anywhere. We have to hire a world-class economist to kind of guess. And most economic analysis like that has a lot of guessing in it. So it's not just it's not that easy to pull that data. I'd be more than happy to work with Brian Turbot and come up with a very, very basic analysis of impact based on reduction in short-term rentals or increase in short-term rentals, regardless, and come up with something that would be very simple. If I'm allowed to do that, I don't know if I'm allowed. Are we allowed to do one person or two people separately? Okay.
One person, not two people.
Okay. So, that part I think we can do. We're not going to, I think in general, we're not going to get, there's lots of things we'd like to get that just aren't available. I mean, we're going to get what's available and that's it. And we're going to have to make decisions with what we get. And quite frankly, we can delve into this stuff and go real deep. It's not going to make a difference in what our decisions are going to be. I mean, we need to have the basic information, which we've been asking for from day one, but we should be happy when we get that and then go forward.
Yeah. And, just to go back to a point that was made in one of the presentations early on by Judy Barrett, who's here with us, this is not the only opportunity, right? This is the group's work for this fall town meeting. And if there is data that is not available, that people want more data, and mechanisms are now being put in place to collect more of that data. So I think, Kathy, you did raise some questions earlier about, maybe we want to suggest adding questions to the registry or things like that can help this group or some future iteration of decision makers about short-term rentals to make sure that the data is being collected that is needed for the future. I think that's totally fair game to name as well.
I heard that the portal's not being launched until the fall. Is that true?
I heard that today as well. Yeah.
Which is that's pretty sad. That's too bad. I was hoping that they would get that going.
Yeah. But I don't know, Brooke, if there's any room for this group to offer things that they wanted collected, or if that's all been set in stone, or if that's something that would have to be an add-on or an amendment to the data collection scope of work in the future.
So I don't know the intersection of this group's work and the existing bylaw for short-term rentals, which is under the health department. So, but certainly, if this group were, as a select board member, if you thought there were pieces of data that would help any regulatory framework that you recommend to be better monitored and managed over time with information that isn't in the registry, I would think that as by way of explanation about how that fits into the puzzle that you're trying to solve for is valuable, would be valuable.
Yeah, great.
So,
David, was your hand up or were you just blocking the light there? Okay. So, just opening to other members who may not have gotten a chance to speak or weigh in. I think what we're left with here is we have a draft process timeline that is probably that may need to be pushed back given the timing for NARAB's data analytics. We'll know more when we get it. CBI is committed to working with all of the players here to give updates to the group on timeline and schedule going forward, but that as soon as the vendor is selected and gets a chance to spend a little time with Granicus and with NARAB's vendor, that vendor, we will aim to have a full meeting for the vendor to come and speak to all of you, learn a little more, talk a little bit about what's going on. But before that, once we know the timeline and Brooke has a draft scope of work, we'll convene a work group meeting, a subgroup meeting, which is, when I say that, I mean like a 1 hour during the day type meeting for whoever can join from this group to share their any feedback or suggestions they have about that draft scope of work. So I think that's the upshots of what we've discussed here. Anyone want to add anything here, John?
Well, if we're finished with the quantitative data, I'd like to talk about some qualitative data and reaching out to other communities. But maybe if anyone else has got, comments on what we've discussed, we should do that first.
Yeah, Karen?
Mine was maybe similar, that I was just curious if it's possible, while we're taking this time to get all of this data, to get just a snapshot more of how many noise complaints we've had in the last year. I think the data that I have seen is from 2020 in the middle of COVID. So, could we, even if we can't get it broken down by how many were from STRs or something like that, can we just get like, is there an increase over time in noise and nuisance complaints, or just to get a little bit more of a snapshot on that? I wondered if that was possible.
Brooke, do you know where we would get that data? Or Megan?
Police department.
Police department.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We
And
pulled
last
the
time we got
reports.
it was insignificant, the number of sound complaints, noise complaints, insignificant. But-
I would say, yes, that's correct. The police department is where we obtained the data last time, which my understanding, the compilation of all noise complaints was a confidential document, obviously property specific. Anyone could FOIA request that. We cross-referenced it with the state registration list for short-term rentals, also a confidential document. I'd say it was a very labor-intensive analysis. And because the results really showed that it wasn't a factor, I'm hesitant to commit to
Sure.
to
I
doing
didn't
that
know
again.
if part of an end of the year report, there was any kind of like, oh, we had this many noise complaints in 2022 or something like that, as just a, yeah.
No,
Just
it's
to-
not
okay.
something that we routinely analyze.
Okay. And not even broken down by STRs, but just to see if they're getting worse or, in general. That was all. That was just my question, but thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so John, you wanted to talk about case studies, but do you want to do that? Or Kathy, did you have something else on this first?
Yeah, just wanted to sort of throw my 2 cents in on Karen's thoughts there, is that since we're supposed to have the registry and the registry is supposed to be doing the enforcement of all the noise and nuisance issues, to me, that's kind of off the table. That's already in the bylaw that exists, that has to be enforced by the town. So therefore, the noise complaints are going to be logged and tracked and have fines against them and so forth. That's already something I don't think we have to deal with it, because I think it's already in the law to do that. That's just my thoughts there.
Okay, thanks. All right, John, you want to talk about case studies?
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick, but I had the opportunity last week. I was with a friend who is a permanent resident in Breckenridge, and we got talking about STRs. And what I found interesting is that they're further along in their journey than we are, for sure. They started working on SDRs and what the problems were and what the actions might be and all that about 5 years ago. And as he was talking, everything he was telling me was what they did was a variation on what we're calling policy levers. And it just made me stop and think that now that we have a little more time, because we're going to have to wait for the quantitative data, which is great. Not great, we're going to have to wait, but we're going to have it. I would just suggest that maybe we can take the time then to reach out to 2 or 3 communities that we think are farther along on their journey, and have them Zoom in and have an open meeting conversation with them. Because for sure, in Breckenridge, things like caps and grandfathering and were all, they're all being used in some way, and others that are not. So my thought is that we kind of resurrect. In the beginning, we had a lot of articles, emailing around and all of that. But that as a group, let's pick 2 or 3 communities and see if we can't reach out and have them come by Zoom, talk to us, so that we can test some of the things, that we have on our policy list.
Yeah, thanks, John. Julia, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I totally appreciate where John is coming from, because I think even just when when we had Mr. Goodman coming in from Granicus talking about some of the levers that he'd seen in other communities, that's always really helpful. I think that going through special, like I've looked at a lot of places. I know a number of people on this call or, that are part of this group have looked at a lot of places. It is really, really hard to find a place where you might say, oh, they have a longstanding tradition of residents renting their homes. They also have a tourist-based economy. They also have a really hard time getting a workforce to show up because they're kind of like an island, so getting all of those elements to sort of line up, I think is really difficult, which I sort of always go back to when we think about, and I think I've said this before on this, during one of these meetings, when we look at Nantucket, I think the most effective thing to do is to think about how we believe, how does the community want the island to really establish itself? And it's sort of like the goal seeking maybe work that we did at the beginning, as opposed to picking a number of communities and just looking at what they've done. I think it's more complicated than that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't really mean, Julia, looking at what they've done. I mean having a conversation with them about what they did and why they did it and what worked and what didn't work. And are there perfect community fits with Nantucket? I doubt it. Are there some that are close enough, though, for us to listen and learn from? I think so.
So I'm curious what others think of this idea. I think I could imagine if we could identify a couple of communities, we could reach out to them and see if we could put together just a little panel. I think we could probably do this as part of our March 14th meeting. If we're meeting hopefully meeting our town data analyst, we could then, for the rest of the meeting, pull a panel together where we get a couple of communities to share some stories. We could, maybe a subgroup wants to help select those communities and a set of questions that we would want to ask. That, I would think we want to try and limit it to a handful of questions and then see if we can pull that together. So I'm curious what other people think about that. David?
No, I think it would be a very interesting exercise for sure. I just, different states, different zoning bylaws, different general bylaws, different levers. But I think that there is some value to listen to the struggles they've had and what they've found through data and because I think there'll be a lot of similarities, but I think how we regulate them is probably going to be far different than how they've chosen, because depends on hotel infrastructure, it depends on accessibility, it depends on a lot of things, but I do think that it would be an interesting exercise. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Jim?
I agree. It would be a really valuable exercise. No community is exactly like Nantucket. Solutions that may work in other communities may not work here, but to hear people talk about what they've tried and what the effects have been, and also the support and the opposition to what they've done, I think would be invaluable to us. Those things exist. That's the real world talking, as opposed to here's a data point. And I think that you can learn a lot more from a real world give and take than you can from simply a data point, although those are important too. I've already mentioned that I talked to one of the enforcement workers in Palm Springs and found a ton of information from doing that. That's just one example. Last week on 1A, which is an NPR national show, there was a whole hour or 2 hour episode on STRs. And they did exactly this. I happened to be driving in the car when a person from Steamboat Springs, Colorado was on, and their concerns are somewhat different from our concerns. For instance, they decided to ban STRs in town but allow them right near the mountain slope. Obviously, we don't have that sort of dichotomy on Nantucket. We're sort of all one town or whatever. But however, they had a problem and they were using some of these same levers that we're talking about. So short answer, yes, I really think this would be very, very valuable. And I think it would enrich our understanding of the issues a whole lot.
Anyone else want to speak for or against this idea? Tom?
Yeah, I think it's generally a good idea, and Nantucket is a unique place. We are 27 miles out to sea, but there are other communities on the Cape that have been grappling with this issue, including Provincetown, way up there on the Cape, who has passed the community impact fee fairly recently. One of my former colleagues in the legislature is a select board member there, and I know has worked on this. So I think if we did this, it might be nice to get a nice little either geographical diversity, but also keeping an eye on that there are towns that have in our geographical area that have similar specifics as we do.
Yeah, thanks. Karen?
I was just going to say, I agree. I think it'd be great to hear, the thought processes of other communities and kind of what they considered and why and so forth. So are we, and that maybe bridge to the next topic, but are we really talking about not meeting at all again until March 14th? Or are we talking about using time in between to do other things? That's just a question.
Yeah, so we'll come to that question in a second. But for here, I do want to propose that if people then are comfortable with this idea, that Semanish and I will send around a request to you all to send us your suggestions on communities that you think would be helpful to hear from. And if you know a particular person who works, not just who lives there, but who's actively involved in this on a professional level, and you have contact information and we can use your name, for example, to get their attention, feel free to share that as well. And then what I would propose is that, right, and did I say communities and the key questions that you would want to ask, right? Which is like, what motivated you to select this lever? How well has it worked? What are the things right? Those kind of things. And then, maybe we can pull together a 1 hour working group, subgroup session to just review these. And then I can work with the town, with our consultants to see if we can pull together that panel. So Peter? You're muted. You're muted, Peter.
Sorry about that. I think Tom's idea about Provincetown is great. Probably the most realistic place to look at is the Vineyard. It's the closest to Nantucket of any other town in the country because it's 10 miles, whatever it is, off the coast. But you do have to take a boat to get there, and it's a significant ride compared to some of the other islands. So I think those. So I don't know which town on the Vineyard, but one of them, and then maybe one other town outside of this area. But I think it's really makes more sense to concentrate on the towns that are here, that are near us, that have the similar responsibilities to both the state and to their community.
Yeah, Dave. You're muted.
My understanding on the Vineyard is that they're actually a couple years behind us. Like it's just starting to be an issue there, and they haven't really even gotten as far as we have. But I'm not saying don't call them, because I think it would be interesting to hear. But I think that they're a few steps behind us.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm just going to come off of what David said. I think what's really important is that we talk to people that are further down the journey, because we don't want to just talk to people that are where we're at. We're not going to learn too much from that. Maybe one on the Cape, but I wouldn't at this moment say it should be one from here and two from there or that. But having people that are further down the track is what I think is important.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And you know, I do think Jeffrey is a good source of, from Granicus is a good source of information about communities as well. He did present, I think, a few very brief snapshots of
Yeah,
some
he did.
communities, so we could go back and look and see if any of those, go back and look, any of those appeal to you to speak to someone from there. Mary?
I keep hearing people saying that, you know, other towns. So Hawaii on the islands have done the same thing. They've dealt with this. They have handled it. I believe in Maui, you have to own your house for 5 years before you can rent it. I mean, I think there are plenty of places that have done this, maybe not on the Cape as much, but there are, Granicus gave us a bunch of examples. And I know in Hawaii, they have done this and managed it. And yes, it is a different type of community, but they probably have a lot more visitors in the winter and they are isolated islands. So
Yeah.
very similar in that sort of respect. I
Great.
don't know anyone there, but
Okay, so we will send something around and to request any additional suggestions you all have, and then we can work to, you know, pull together a proposal for what this panel, whom we might invite. It may partly be we want to reach out to, you know, 6 or 7 communities and hopefully find 3 who are going to be available and want to, you know, spend their time at our meeting for free. Okay, so let's move on to the schedule and work plan. So let me premise by saying, I think as Brooke had mentioned, there is cost to the town for these meetings. There's cost, of course, of my and Samanish's time, but there's also cost of the members of the town staff that are helping to post meetings and are helping to be here and staff the meetings, et cetera. So this work plan was created with that in mind, limitations in budget, and trying to think about what is going to be the best use of our time. So that we use our resources as effectively as possible. It was my sense that until we got to mid-March, there wasn't, there was not work that had to be done that couldn't be done after that. But I'm open to, I know some of you have different ideas and there are things you want to do between now and then, and I'm open to you know, bringing those to the group and talking about them. I did want to just to speak to the draft schedule I put out. You will see, right, there were 3 meetings scheduled focused on data. The first to meet the data analyst and confirm the pathway and progress and approach. A second one that would be hopefully midway through, with exactly the point in mind that I think a number of you have raised, that like, we don't want to wait till they're completely done before we hear from how it's going. So it was really meant to be a, you know, report back how it's going. And I don't know how much information we would have at that point. I think we'll know more as we go, and either that would be a shorter meeting or we might have time for more case studies or additional discussion of initial topics that people want to dig deeper into. And then the hope was that by April 11th, we would have a full collection of the data. Again, all this timeline is going to have to, we'll have to revisit it when we know more about the timeline for the data analyst. But that was my thinking about those. And then my thought was, after that, to imagine meeting quite regularly with our every other week meetings, with subgroup meetings in between as needed. And we would really dig into what meaning making from the data, and shortly thereafter try to come together for a potentially even full day in-person meeting where we can really dig in and make a lot of progress. And that would be a chance to perhaps work on, as Karen laid out, we would have sort of a policy suggestion framework, and work in small groups to really define, here's the elements of policy I would like, here's what I think they would accomplish, here's the impacts we think they would have, here's how we might evaluate them, et cetera. Talk about that as a full group, go back into small groups, work on it further, right? And really try to make a lot of iterative progress all at one time, all in one place. So this was sort of my, instead of the usual meet all the time, even though we know our data isn't there, to use our resources by having a really concentrated session where we come together and really try to develop and evaluate proposals. The other thing I just want to say about this draft schedule is that I really wanted to try to fit in a public meeting here that would give us more of a chance to hear from the public. And in addition to having the public talk to each other in small groups, as we did, we could include some more individual polling that, again, we could replicate town-wide with a survey. And so we could try to collect a little bit more rigorous data points on how the public is feeling about the ideas that this group is coming up with. And then for us to be able to come back together, look at that data from the public and see how it might change the perceptions of what this group wants to put forward. And in the meantime, trying to work on actually trying to translate the policy ideas that you all have into bylaw language. And it's been, clarified to me that Judy Barrett, that is part of the task that she can fulfill for this group, working hand in hand with town council, knowing that town council is very busy, and that Judy has a lot of expertise in this area. Between the two of them being able to take the policy ideas we have and translate them into the proper language, legal language, to go into both a zoning and a general bylaw, or either or both a zoning and a general bylaw. Now, knowing we may have a little bit more time going into July, we can push this a little further. On the other hand, it may get pushed for us given the data schedule. So we may have to leave that a little bit open as to exactly when the right time is to have our in-person meeting. We want to schedule it with enough leeway or enough lead time that those of you who would need to be traveling in are able to do so. And those of you that need to take off for the day of work or whatever it may be, right, are able to schedule that. But with enough flexibility that we make sure that when we come together, we have already done the work of seeing the data, talking and analyzing the data a little bit together before we come together to really dig into proposals. So this is all draft. This was, just my attempt at trying to figure out the best way forward for the tasks we have ahead of us, within sort of a resource efficient timeframe, given the town's needs. So with that, let me open it up for discussion. Jim.
I understand your reasoning. I think it's all very well thought out. My question, though, is this seems totally driven by data. And it seems to me that we also need to hone our skills on policy levers and other issues that we simply need to look at in depth and come up, certainly speaking for myself, come up to speed on. Now, one way to do that would, of course, be those case studies and talking to other communities. But it seems to me it's not enough just to be looking at data at this point, or data, that we need to also have meetings where we're talking about policy levers, where we're talking about other issues that are ways of responding to the data that we're going to get. And so I'm concerned that this only seems to look toward data and not toward our skills and possible bag of tricks in terms of dealing with data in ways that will really help the community. So I don't know, maybe that won't make sense to people, but that's my initial reaction. I think you've done a really nice job, but I'm concerned that it's too one focus on data.
Yeah. And can I just ask though, Jim, because we did have a meeting where Granicus shared a whole bunch of policy levers,
Yes.
had a meeting where we all did an initial deep dive on which of these policy levers people were sort of drawn toward and not. What would be the nature of the conversation about policy levers that you, given that the group doesn't know yet what they want the policy levers to do
Right.
without the data, how you would want those conversations to take place?
That's a good question. That hybrid meeting I thought was very good when we started to look at those, and each group threw out ideas and then we sort of brought it together. Well, I think one way is by hearing from other communities that, as John said, are farther down the road. What effect did the policy levers have? What were the surprises? What were the good effects, if there were some? And then to have more small group meetings where perhaps within our group where we actually talk about different levers and what we think, because just speaking for myself, I feel like I don't have a firm enough understanding yet of these levers and what they can do. And I think that if we get more information and then discuss them and work out thoughts with each other, not in a antagonistic way, but in trying to understand what people are thinking about the different levers, I think then we'll have more skill that we can bring productively to dealing with the data that we learn. And we know we're not going to learn everything from the data. I hope we'll learn a lot of good things, but and helpful things. But anyway, that's my take on your question. Good question.
Okay, thanks, Jim. John.
Yeah, well, Jim said most of it, and I 100% agree that we have to look more than just data. So I had a, in support of what Jim just said, I'd had a few things that we could and should be doing that we don't need to wait for data. And one is we need to do more work on articulating the problem. And, some might say, well, you can't articulate the problem if you don't have the data. Well, to a degree, yes. But, everybody keeps asking us, so what problem are you trying to solve? And I think we could have some productive discussions before we get the data on that. I also think it would be very useful, now with the passage of time, to have a session with town council to go over the policy levers again and see, what of these are going to be really legally open to us and what are not, so that when we do get the data, we already have in our minds what town council is telling us we can and cannot do. I think it would be great to have one session fairly quickly dedicated to a discussion on the STR related articles that are going into the May meeting, and let us all understand what those articles really are and what about them is good, what's not so good. Do we need to respond to that in any way? But I, for one, would really value a greater understanding and hearing how everybody else feels about the warrants that are going before us, the articles that are going before us.
John, I'll get you the date that they're going to present to the FinCom, each one of them, and you can see their presentation and then hear the FinCom's analysis. If you want to do that.
And I'm going to do that, Peter, but what I'm talking about is this group. And discuss.
And can I jump on that point specifically? Because that is a point on which I've been given explicit instruction by the town that this group is not this group was not designed to weigh in on the citizen petition articles about short-term rentals. In fact, it was explicitly part of the ground rules of this group that this group was not going to be taking a position or supporting or fighting. That's not what this group is about, right? This group,
Stacy, all I was suggesting is that they listen. I wasn't suggesting anything other than that.
yeah, no, that's fine, Peter.
Yeah.
And I'm referring to
Yeah.
John's suggestion that this group
Oh,
have a
okay.
session
I'm
where we
sorry.
specifically talk about the May town. This group's as a town committee, as a
Okay.
town body, John, this group's job is to propose, develop consensus approach to regulating short-term rentals that you will put before the town at a special town meeting, not to analyze or examine. And I've been told that that is not something that the select board would like this group to.
So let me move on.
Okay.
This is just a few things. The purpose of this is, should we be meeting more regularly, now rather than wait till later in the year? I agree with Jim. I think we should. And I think we've talked about some subjects already. Another one is, there seem to be a lot of people agreeing around this whole real person concept of when it comes to STRs. I think we could profitably talk about that some more. And as Jim said, let's get the discussion going, I guess, at a deeper level than we've had before. And it has been a while since we had any kind of discussions like that. So I would be for trying to get, if not bi-weekly, more regular meetings sooner rather than later to do some of this. But I'll leave my list at that.
Okay, thank you. David.
Oh, thank you, Stacy. And I just kind of want to go back to what Jim said and touch a little bit on what John said. I think that it would be a great idea to take as an exercise more than anything else some of these suggestions that came out of the large group, small group meetings, and as an exercise, see if we chose to restrict or create policy levers surrounding them, how would be the most effective way to do it? And I think that it would be a helpful process for everyone to get to understand bylaws versus zoning versus, bylaws, what's more effective, what the consequences are, and not that we're going to create these levers now, but for us to start rolling up our sleeves and working with the idea and the philosophy of them, and in turn giving everyone a little better understanding of what each policy level, what tools we have available to us and how effective those tools are, just in almost like we're playing with dolls, right? Dress them up, we see what happens. And I just think that could be a very interesting exercise for all of us to do. And it would, I think, in the end, give us all a little better understanding of the tools we have to work with.
Yep.
Okay. Kathy?
I totally agree with Jim. I think that we need to have some more meetings, and I think there's been some very good suggestions of things that we can do. Back to what I heard, and I'm not trying to make this a controversial thing that John mentioned about the short-term rental articles that are out there. I absolutely agree with you. We are not to debate them or take a stand on them or anything at all like that. But I think it would be useful for us to understand them and understand, I don't know if this will happen, but what happens if we come down the line with our little policy levers and then one of those passes at town meeting? That changes the whole thing for us about what we can do and not do. So we might want to just think about what would happen or what ifs. That would be the only level of discussion that I would want to have on those articles. So that's what I'm throwing out there. And then define the problem. I agree. The public clearly made that a statement. I think we could probably, given the input we got from them, we could probably define what the public thinks the problem is or the problems are. I think we could work on that without data, because that's their data. We're getting data from the people who are voting, the people who care about this issue. So the other thing, and this is the problem, this is like throwing the hand grenade in the room and then running out the door. And I don't mean to do that, but I'm just throwing this out there. Having participated in other town committees where you're appointed and you have to follow open meeting laws and so forth, work groups and committees, we're probably the only one that doesn't have any kind of like, you're the chair of the meeting, Stacy, so we can't meet without you because that's the way it's been set up. And I understand your scope has been enlarged because of everything moving out. The town has X amount of dollars. They can't change that. So you're in between a rock and a hard place, and you're doing your best, absolutely, to figure out how to fit it all in. So here's the question. I'm not hearing an awful lot of disrespect and nastiness among the group here. Is it possible for us to meet on our own and elect our own chair or vice chair that can run the meetings following the public meeting laws, and that don't have to involve you because it costs the town money that way? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, I work on the advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers, and we're appointed by the town, and then we self-govern. And that's, there can be controversial issues that get discussed, but we just deal with it. So I'm just throwing that out there. It may be a crazy idea, but that might be one way we could get some work done for those who want to participate in it. And obviously we would need a quorum to do so. And just have these kinds of discussions. So that's it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Kathy, you would actually need, I think, consensus of the group to select a chair. And then that chair would have to do all of the agenda development, posting of the meeting, all of that. So, I mean, I think, yeah, happy to hear other people's thoughts on that. Karen.
I was just going to say, I agree that I think it would be great to be able to discuss the levers more and in more depth. I think the hybrid meeting was great where we really got to talk to each other, but in my mind, that was just sort of like brainstorming. I didn't really think of it as sort of a deep dive into those things, and just kind of like, what are some general ideas? And I'd love to be able to talk about them and other things in more depth. Also, I'd love to see, kind of like the questions I had before, could we have a subgroup, or is there a way to kind of go in for, once we have these levers, can we have a series of questions we're going to be asking about each one and have those developed ahead of time?
Yeah.
And then once we get get the data, get the proposals, we have a process for evaluating things that's a little bit more structured potentially. And lastly, I'd love to discuss the in-person meeting at some point, because the sooner we can get that on the books, the better. And I'd love to, meet for as long as possible if I'm going to, kind of go to the time and expense of getting there. Even if we did something one night and all the next day, just, or whatever people could do, but let's really give ourselves time together to do this work when we get a chance. So.
Yeah, thanks. Peter?
Yeah, we can't have a separate group with a separate leader. I mean, this I was on the working group that put this organization together, and we insisted that there be an outside person, Stacy, who had no political interest in the results. There's nobody else on the committee who doesn't have a political interest in the results. So, I mean, I think it's impossible to do that. I don't think the select board would allow it, and I would think it would be a very bad idea. Having other meetings and stuff, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. All I'm talking about is having a meeting without Stacy being the head of the meeting cannot happen, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, to speak to that, I mean, I have already submitted a budget amendment request to the town based on this work plan. if we were to add, it sounds like people have named a number of valuable things we could be doing in February. So that would be 2 additional meetings. So I can add that. And when I present tomorrow to the select board, can suggest adding 2 additional meetings. And so then that would be February 14th and February 28th. I know someone raised some concern about doing this on Valentine's Day, but I really don't know how we would avoid that, given that, you know, there's all these conflicting other times and meetings. And, you know, we really do need, I just have to say, we really do need 2 weeks between these meetings in order to put together materials. I know we're not always getting you all your meeting summaries and all your packet materials as quickly as you would like. And we absolutely won't be able to do it with less than 2 weeks between meetings. So, you know, but can we, given your suggestions about diving deeper into policy levers, discussing the, you know, the ideas that were raised in the hybrid meeting in more detail. I think the idea of developing that framework for how we're going to analyze proposals, as Karen suggested, is something we can draft, and then we can discuss that together. And the conversation, happy to have more conversation on the problem as you all see it and as you interpret from the public. So based on this, I'm curious other people's thoughts, but based on this, it sounds like there's a lot of interest in holding meetings in February, particularly digging deeper into the potential policy levers and the problem, the way people see the problem. So I'm happy to propose that to the select board. I haven't gotten any feedback on the revised budget I already sent them, so we'll see what they would think about this, but just putting that then out to all of you to see what other people think about it. John?
Is there anything we can do, Stacy, to help you with that discussion tomorrow? You know, do the select board need to hear from some of us in public comment before their meeting gets started? You know, so that they feel a little bit of the passion around this.
Well,
and not you asking for, you know, a couple of more meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we could do is maybe see if there's consensus of the group on expanding this work plan to add those February meetings, and then I could come with a group consensus request if, you know,
good idea.
If that's what the group would like. Julia, were you going to say?
I was just going to say what Meredith put in the chat, that the 28th is school break for Nantucket. So I'm not sure it affects most people here, but it affects families.
Okay. And but does doing an evening meeting via Zoom, then, like, are you precluded from that during that break?
No, I just mean it's a vacation week for the whole island.
Right.
So it's, you know, I don't know, everybody can make it, that's all.
Right. So yeah, I definitely want to hear if people feel like that day would work for them or not. Tom?
I was just going to say very quickly and simply that the presentations that we've had already from Granick, from Jeffrey several times, from Judy, who's with us tonight, from town council, including the document that Mr. Giorgio prepared for us, answers quite a bit of questions that I think that a lot of us may have still lingering. And I think that might be those presentations and that document and/or documents could be a good jumping off point for maybe us to send questions to you, and then at our next meeting, whenever that is, then we can boil that down. But I think there's a lot that's already been spoken about at meetings that we've had. It's just we're several months removed from a lot of it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. So yeah, I mean, I wonder if, given the school break and the fact that that's typically not a time you have public meetings, you know, maybe we do plan on a meeting for the 14th or maybe even the 21st in that case, and to you know, really dig in on policy levers and that would then, it would just be adding one meeting in that case. Yes, John.
Yeah, I'll just say for myself, I have attended 2 of these meetings from vacations. And I think when we all signed up for this, I don't think, unless, you know, for myself, I think we should go ahead with the 2. If a couple of people can't make it, they can't make it.
John, I was saying it in the context of the public attending.
Well,
That's why I was saying it.
Yeah, and Megan, do you want to speak to this issue? Because I think it's really up to the town. If the town has a tradition of not holding public meetings when people are on school break, you know, that's up to the town. Mary, did you have something?
I would agree that it's kind of an unwritten rule that the town does not conduct any sort of public meetings during that week. Really, it is geared towards the lack of public participation. A lot of folks are not around. They're not going to be tuning in. And historically, across all boards, commissions, committees, we have not conducted meetings during that week.
Mary?
Yeah, I think that it would be ridiculous to have a meeting that week. I'm sorry. The whole island empties out. I know there are a lot of you that don't live here year round or not here right now, but I won't be coming to a meeting because I will be on break. A lot of people go away, and I think they don't even have a select board meeting that week. I would bet a bunch of the town staff that attend this meeting are going on vacation. So I'm sorry, like, I think that I would rather come to a meeting on Valentine's Day than I would during February break. Instead, I would rather be spending more time with my children, who I don't really get to see on nights of like this. So
yeah, thanks, Mary.
I vote no.
Okay. So, I mean, I do think in order to bring this to the town to be asking for additional resources for more meetings, I would really like to have the full group's support. And it sounds like the town already this is not something that they do, is have meetings during school vacation. So I think we should not plan to propose that.
No, but Stacy, you know, it's the 1st of February tomorrow, and the next meeting is the March the 14th. Can't we find 2 dates in 6 weeks to get 2 meetings in?
The problem is that, John, we do really need enough time between each meeting to produce a meeting summary, to produce all the materials, to post the meeting.
No.
Yeah. So.
All right, I give in.
I'm always happy to have longer meetings if people want to meet for, you know, longer time. But yeah, to turn around, to prepare for and try and get you materials for a meeting a week, meetings that are a week apart. You know, it's just
but why couldn't we have one on, say, February the 15th, 2 weeks from now, and then I don't know, like March. I give in, Stacy.
Right. I mean, that, you know, I do think it's a challenge because we know that there are the select board meets on Wednesdays and other committees are meeting and, so.
Are we going to at least try to get one?
Yeah, so how do people feel about proposing then the February 14th for a deep dive on policy levers, and that can be added to the work plan?
We start at 6 instead of at 4. I mean, instead of at 5, because it conflicts every week. It conflicts with my FinCom meetings. So
Okay.
if we could start an hour later, I could go do both. Because I'm not allowed to miss any of these meetings, or I'm going to get thrown off.
Sure. Thanks, Julia.
I was gonna agree if that's what the group wants, but also mention that I hope Judy will be there because she's obviously a huge, I think resource in terms of helping us with understanding levers, as well as Granicus if they can be there.
Judy, how are you feeling about February 14th for 6 to 9?
So I think I have you in my calendar for every conceivable Tuesday night that I could imagine. Hold on. Yeah, I can be with you until about 7:30 that night, possibly all the way to 8. I have another meeting on some zoning I wrote for another town. It's a public hearing, but that starts later. So I don't see a problem.
Okay. Great. Tom?
Stacy, I'm sure this is going to be your next point, but would that February 14th meeting preclude having the meeting where we might get folks from other communities to come in before we really start digging down on specific policies?
I mean, my guess is that February 14th would be a little soon for us to manage to get people on such short notice to come and present. But I do think we could still have a panel for March 14th. And potentially even more people on the 28th if we because my guess is that we will still have time beside discussion of where the data consultant is so far. We'll have time to discuss other things.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So are we going to start at 6 and go to 9? Is that what we're suggesting?
I think that was Peter's suggestion, or at least start at 6, and maybe we would start at 6 and go to 8. I don't know what people want to do.
Depends on the agenda and how that's set up, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me think about that agenda and how I might structure. It does sound to me like the two, the core area of discussion from what all of you said was really about the digging deeper into potential policy levers that were raised at our December 5th meeting, and really giving people a chance to talk about them. And I'm gonna, Megan, maybe you and I can talk a little offline about whether we can do small groups via Zoom and be consistent with public meeting if there's somehow access for people to go around. I don't quite know. I mean, I feel like those discussions work best if we could be more in small groups, but I don't know that we're going to find a way to do that via Zoom. But I will work on an agenda that really gives us that really works on that. John?
Yeah, I just hope, Stacy, like adding a meeting, but then shortening our meetings by an hour. It seems like that's not the net result that doesn't get us much. And Peter, I mean, we do have alternates, right, for these situations where if somebody can't make it.
John,
then,
it's every week. It's not just one time.
Yeah, well,
And it's all the FinCom, right? So
Yes,
even
yes.
an alternate needs to be there.
Yes.
I mean, that's the issue. We set these meetings at a time that interferes
Right.
with a standing meeting
Yeah.
schedule. So
I just hope we don't shorten this to 2 hours. That's all.
yeah, that was not, I meant that for next
14th.
time. Yeah, but beyond that, Peter, we can talk if there's, I don't know. I don't know if there's a different time that works better for everybody. You know, I guess
Is 6 to 9 no good instead of
6 to
5 to
9
8?
is possible. 6 to 9 is possible. It's just
That,
a late dinner.
yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem staying later. It's just that if I could do both meetings, it would be great. If I can't, I can't. But
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, how do people feel about 6 to 9 then in general for all the meetings, just shifting to 6 to 9?
Yeah.
You don't love it, but you're willing.
we
Okay.
owe you, Tom, we owe you dinner.
All right. So let me just let's look at this draft work plan as a whole, knowing that by the time we come back together on the 14th, we will then know more about the actual timing for for NARAB's data consultant and hopefully for the towns. And so we'll know, Karen, a little more about the in-person meeting. The one update I wanted to give you all about that was that we did find out that the 8th and 9th could not work for the space. And so the options that we heard from the town were available were May 4th, May 12th, or May 19th. Was that right, Megan?
I believe it was the 5th and the 12th. Hold on, bear with me a moment. I'll pull up the email from Robin. Sorry, we reserved the full days for May 4th and May 12th.
Okay. So yeah, so those were the days we were going to hold for now. And, you know, hopefully that would give us enough time to, you know, and maybe we aim for the 12th, given that got a bit of a delay. No, that doesn't work for you. Okay.
My daughter graduates from college that day, that day and the next day. So
Some of us will be on island for Daffy, and it's right after that, and town meeting, which is right, you know, so it's right in between those two.
When
That's
is
good for me? Daffy is the last. Daffy is my 70th birthday. In case anybody wants to come to the Daffy parade and say happy birthday to me, the town of Nantucket holds a party for me every year. Thank you very much.
Sorry, but
the
what
end
is
of April? The 29th.
the 29th?
So in other words, the
That's
Daffy
a
weekend,
Saturday.
No, I'm not saying the 29th. I'm just saying people that are from off island might be on island between there, and also town meeting is the following weekend. So I'm just saying I would choose the 4th over the 12th. That's all I'm trying to say.
It'd be a better week for me as well.
Okay. How do other people feel about the 4th if we aimed for the 4th? Anybody unable to do the 4th?
May the 4th be with you.
Yeah, exactly. We'll all wear our capes and lightsabers. All right, well, you know, it may squeeze us a little bit on getting through the data. So I think let's hold that tentatively for now. And then I think, Megan, I think you had said the 19th was potentially an option as well. That I didn't
So
like, but
right, so she gave me May 1st, May 4th, May 5th, May 12th, and May 19th. And then you had suggested from those available dates, the 4th or the 12th.
yeah. And so maybe what we should do is hold the 9th. How do people feel about the 19th if it had to be then?
okay.
I'll be out of the country, but I'll do it through Zoom.
Okay, Kathy?
I will be out of the country and there is no Zoom available, but Robin can certainly join.
Right.
Maybe.
Okay. All right, so the 4th is definitely our first choice because it sounds like more people would be able to potentially get there in person, and the 19th maybe we need to hold just in case. we don't get our data in time to make the best use of our time together in person. And I know, Karen, we want to figure it out sooner rather than later, but hopefully by 2 weeks from now, we'll have enough information to know and
fine.
to nail that down.
Yeah, that's fine. And I appreciate that.
Okay.
So when is our next meeting?
So let's plan on the next meeting being February 14th,
Okay,
6 to 9.
got it.
I will update the schedule. I'll present this as a request to the select board. And yeah, other comments about the work plan and schedule? Karen, your hand is still up. Was there something else? No. John, yes?
Yeah, so Stacey, you're going to be asking actually just for one extra meeting at this point, right?
I am, yeah.
It's just I might be in the public comment at the beginning saying you are going to hear from and we need it.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other comments about this work plan? People did name a bunch of things that they want to make sure we're going to add in, so we will add that. But anything else right now, and then otherwise we will open to public comment. Okay, so I see that we have one person from the public who has their hand up. Let me first, I don't know if we have any of our alternates. You're also welcome to just raise your hand and let us know you'd like to share a comment. But let's start with Mickey. Mickey Fiegel, I'm not going to try. You should be able to speak, to unmute yourself.
I just asked you to unmute, so you should have a notification that's pointing you in the right direction.
I know your hand has been up a while, so perhaps you've forgotten. Okay, anyone else from the public? Feel free to raise your hand. Lark?
Hi, is this a moment where I'm sorry, I missed that public meeting. Can I mention two things insofar as how I feel about some of these possible lovers?
You can, yes. Just start by introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Lark Jacobs. I live in Wisconsin and have done so year-round. Hi, Jim. Have done so year-round for over 30 years. Sent both my girls through the Nantucket New School very proudly, and know Jim so beautifully through there. We have an adjoined lot that we have a rental property on, and again live here year-round in our main house. And I just want to share two items, or I'll be very brief. It's entirely likely that if you don't grandfather short-term rentals of local people, local owners, they'll be forced to sell and go to more wealthy owners who will only be there part-time, creating an empty house community even beyond what we already have. I'm assuming that the goal is to improve affordable housing. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that also you can't convert a $3 million home into an affordable house unless you condominiumize it into a multiple dwelling, which would increase the infrastructure burden and congestion. So it's beyond me to understand why lowering the number of weeks that someone is renting translates into affordable housing. And forgive me, because I'm betting this has been discussed, but I just wanted to voice that. And thank you for allowing me to do that. And then one other point is just that I don't really understand why it matters if there is a high turnover rate. It's still the same number of heads and beds. If you restrict the short-term rentals, you're forcing lower income renters, say single weekers, out of the market. And Nantucket has always been a family friendly, we have never ever had a complaint living right next door. Perhaps that's why. And we have sequential weekly rentals generally, for the most part. Some of them are 2 weekers, and we have one that comes for 3 weeks, but they're almost always 3 generations, and they come for family reunions. And it warms my heart to see them on our lawn that we share and play volleyball and all. And I think it's a kind of a service, and the house would be empty otherwise, or, I kind of don't get why the short-term rental family owned kind of thing is on the table, limiting that. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Lark.
Thank you.
Ron Kokut?
Yes, hi, my name is Ron Kokot, and I've been a seasonal resident of Tom Nevers since 1984. Off and on, I have rented my house to people on vacation, and it's worked out extraordinarily well for 30 years, and I would hope that wouldn't change. My comment, though, goes back to the very beginning of tonight's meeting and the summary of the group discussions that took place several weeks ago. And I just had a point of clarification at the very beginning of the summary that was sent out that talks about connection to the island. It states in one of the paragraphs, and I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize, but as best I can recall, it states that there was significant concerns about the divide STRs have caused between neighbors. And when I read that, I said, I don't think that's true at all. I think before this, and I wasn't going to worry about it until tonight, we said we're going to send this back to everybody. I think that the wording could be looked at. I think the debate and the raising of this issue in the last 3 years has caused the divide. And if that's what that paragraph means, then I think it should be rewarded. And I have one other comment. I think something that's not been discussed enough in the over the years and in the working group here is that I think there may be different solutions for different portions of the island. And I think it's very important that it be looked at in that way. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. And yes, thank you for raising that. We did get that comment by email from someone as well. That is indeed it is that people spoke about the debate about STRs being something that was dividing people, not the existence of STRs being something that was dividing neighbors.
Right.
So we will make that clarification. Thanks. Okay, well, with that, unless Mickey Flegel-Pinichit is able to unmute and speak. Key, are you there? Does not seem so. So I think with that, we are going to close out our meeting. Thank you all very much for your participation and really helpful input. And we will see you again at 6 o'clock on the 14th of March. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.